Look at the dashboard of your civilization. You are staring at a number called GDP and celebrating because the needle is moving up, but you are misreading the instrument. That is not a measure of wealth. It is a speedometer for destruction. The current operating system of your global economy has a fatal, hard-coded bug. It calculates the conversion of low-entropy, useful resources into high-entropy, useless waste as growth. Every time you burn a liter of oil, scatter phosphorus into the ocean, or erode an inch of topsoil, the cash register rings, and you call it profit. You are not growing, you are cannibalizing your own life support system, and you are accelerating.
Hold on, we need to ground this immediately, because you are launching a rhetorical drone strike on the very basis of modern society without establishing the facts. You are taking the fundamental mechanism of civilization, production, consumption, trade, and framing it as some kind of suicide pact. That is a massive oversimplification. GDP, gross domestic product, is a measure of value added. It tracks the goods and the services that literally improve the quality of life for 8 billion people. It tracks innovation, infrastructure, the ability of a family to put food on the table. If that needle is moving up, it historically correlates with lower infant mortality, higher literacy, longer lifespans. To call that destruction is to dismiss the entire history of human progress. You're essentially arguing that civilization itself is a mistake just because we dare to use resources to make life better.
I am not arguing morality, I am arguing thermodynamics. The universe does not care about your quality of life metrics if the physical invoice remains unpaid. The bug is the linear model. Let's be very precise here so we move beyond the emotional rhetoric. You dig up phosphorus, a highly concentrated, low-entropy resource essential for all biological life. You mine it in Morocco, you put it in fertilizer, you grow wheat, you eat it, and then you flush it into the river system where it flows into the ocean and dilutes to the point of absolute irrecoverability. In your economic ledger, that chain of events is recorded as a series of highly successful, profitable transactions. But in physical reality, it is a permanent loss of order. We are taking concentrated, useful atoms and scattering them into a chaotic state. That is the definition of entropy. And your economic model counts that scattering as an asset. It is a speedometer for destruction because the faster you grow, the faster you deplete the physical inventory required to keep the engine running in the first place.
But this is just the classic Malthusian trap. I mean, people have been predicting we'd run out of resources for centuries. We ran out of whale oil, so we found kerosene. We ran out of guano, so we invented the Haber-Bosch process to fix nitrogen straight from the air. We don't just scatter things, we innovate, we find substitutes. We are seeing the dematerialization of the economy right now. We are creating way more value with significantly less physical stuff. Think about it. A single smartphone replaced a camera, a GPS device, a flashlight, a calendar, a massive library of books. That is creating order, not chaos. And the price mechanism handles this perfectly. If phosphorus gets scarce, the price goes up, and the market naturally finds a solution or a substitute. You are completely ignoring the efficiency of the free market to solve exactly the problems you are outlining.
You are confusing financial efficiency with physical reality. You cannot innovate a substitute for the periodic table. You mentioned the smartphone. Let us look at the hardware, not the hallucination of the software. That device relies on rare earth metals, neodymium, praseodymium, indium. These elements are not infinite. And once they are scattered into e-waste dumps and landfills, the energy required to recover those diluted atoms exceeds the energy they could ever possibly provide. That is the entropy trap. You mentioned the Haber-Bosch process. That requires massive amounts of natural gas to generate the heat and pressure. You merely shifted the bottleneck from bird guano to fossil fuels, and the price mechanism you worship has a fatal lag time. By the time the price of topsoil accurately reflects its true thermodynamic scarcity, the harvest has already failed. You cannot negotiate with the soil. This is the linear trap. You are celebrating the efficiency of the fire while the house burns down to the foundation. We must rip out the current definition of GDP and replace it. I am proposing the protocol switch. GDP must equal the Earth restoration rate.
Earth restoration rate? I mean, look, that sounds like a fantastic slogan for an activist's bumper sticker, but we are discussing global macroeconomics here. How do you possibly operationalize that? How do you measure an entire planetary economy based on restoration without causing mass starvation and total collapse?
It is a mathematical formula, not a political slogan. The formula is the integral of the restoration rate multiplied by acceleration over time. In this new operating system, we fundamentally redefine the core concepts of debt and profit. Currently, you believe debt is financial. You owe paper money to a bank. In the protocol switch, debt is redefined as any act that scatters resources. Any act of linear consumption is a debt against the physical planet. Conversely, profit is strictly defined as the recovery, concentration, and circulation of those resources. We are talking about the infrastructure of metabolism. The only true asset on this planet is the physical order of atoms. If you are not restoring the cycle, if you are not capturing that phosphorus before it hits the ocean, you are not generating profit. You are simply burning the structural furniture of your house to keep the living room warm for one more night.
Okay, let's play that out in the real world. If you unilaterally redefine consumption as debt, you effectively freeze the entire global economy. Immediately. If every time a consumer buys a car or a steak or a commercial flight, they are incurring a massive resource debt, purchasing power completely collapses, investment stops cold. You are talking about a system that actively penalizes the very activity that keeps the lights on and keeps billions of people employed. It's economic suicide. You're asking for a complete, sudden halt to the material accumulation that drives human motivation. People want things. They want better lives for their children. You can't just tell them that their desire for a refrigerator or a washing machine is a bug in the code. We have built a modern service economy that relies on flow, not just hoarding stocks of metal.
The service economy is a myth. It is a digital hallucination floating on top of a brutal material reality. Your services, your cloud computing, your artificial intelligence, your digital banking, they require massive physical server farms, millions of gallons of water for cooling systems, and thousands of tons of rare earth metals. There is no cloud. There is just other people's hardware consuming gigawatts of baseload energy. It is not a bug in the code, it is a fatal error in your survival logic. The restoration protocol does not demand that human beings stop wanting things. It demands that the physical delivery of those things be strictly circular. You can have the washing machine, provided the materials are leased from a closed loop, where 100% of the metal is recovered at the end of its functional life. If that loop does not exist, the product cannot legally or physically exist. You call this economic suicide? The current trajectory is actual biological suicide. The physical default is coming. When the freshwater aquifers turn saline from over-extraction, you do not get to print more water at the central bank. If you treat linear consumption as the engine, you drive off the cliff. If you treat restoration as the engine, you build a bridge.
But we already have mechanisms for this transition. We don't need to completely tear down the entire concept of capitalism or rewrite the economic dictionary from scratch. We have the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have carbon credit markets. We have international treaties like the Paris Agreement. We have ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance criteria that are already guiding trillions of dollars of institutional capital into responsible investing. We have an entire global infrastructure of environmental regulation designed specifically to curb these excesses. We have responsible leaders and institutions working on this transition right now. We can create a soft landing where we gradually, safely shift to renewables and a circular economy without this radical, jarring redefinition of value that you're demanding. Why destroy the entire system when we can just regulate it properly?
Those institutions are not the solution. They are the drowning rescue squad.
That is incredibly dismissive. These are serious scientists, policymakers, and diplomats dedicating their entire careers to this exact problem.
They are performers reading old linear growth manuals through a megaphone while sinking in the exact same rough seas as everyone else. Look at the structural reality of the problem. These institutions hold climate conferences in air-conditioned convention centers powered by the very fossil fuel grid they claim to be dismantling. They sign highly publicized, non-binding agreements that are instantly ignored the moment quarterly GDP dips by a fraction of a percent. They fundamentally lack the capacity to enforce a physical tourniquet. They cannot stop the bleeding of resources because their salaries, their institutional funding, and their political power depend entirely on the tax revenue generated by that exact bleeding. They are functionally dysfunctional. This is the principal agent problem scaled up to a planetary level. The agent, the politician, is incentivized to keep the champagne party going for the next 4-year election cycle, not the next 10,000-year geological cycle. Political performers cannot lead this migration. They are merely acoustic noise in a failing system.
So you just write off democracy? You write off diplomacy entirely? That is a remarkably dangerous path to go down. If you say all politics is just noise, what is the signal? If the rescue squad is failing, as you say, who exactly is supposed to execute this massive protocol switch? You're talking about a totalitarian re-engineering of global resource flow. That requires massive coordination, complex laws, strict enforcement. It requires the very state capacity that you are openly mocking. If we don't use the state apparatus, what is left? Anarchy?
The signal is greed.
Greed? Wait, you just spent the last 10 minutes brutally attacking the consumption model, attacking the profit motive, and now you're seriously saying greed is the solution? That is a massive contradiction. You cannot possibly solve a crisis created by corporate greed with more corporate greed.
It is only a contradiction if you operate under the delusion that ethics drives economics. It does not. The transition to circular capitalism, to the Earth restoration rate, will not happen because it is morally correct. It will happen because of the self-preservation instinct of capital itself. This is the engine of greed. We are going to rewrite the foundational rules so that physical restoration equals financial profit. Once that switch is flipped, raw human greed becomes the relentless engine for Earth repair. It is a hostile takeover of the concept of value. The epic capitalist does not care if he is selling ecological destruction or ecological restoration, as long as the line on the chart goes up. We simply change the physical parameters of the chart so the line only goes up when the planet gets fixed.
But the capitalist will always choose the cheapest option. That is the fundamental rule of business. It is always cheaper to dump toxic waste into a local river than to build a multi-million-dollar facility to filter it. It is always cheaper to strip mine a pristine forest for new lithium than to painstakingly recycle old batteries, because the external costs, the pollution, the habitat loss, are free to the company. That is exactly why we need the regulations that you despise. If you leave it entirely to the engine of greed, they will strip the planet bare and sell the scraps to the highest bidder. You are betting the survival of the human species on the exact same predatory force that put us in this mess to begin with.
You are operating on an outdated pricing model that no longer maps to physical reality. The cheapest option is rapidly becoming the suicide option. This is exactly what the drowning rescue squad fundamentally fails to grasp. We are rapidly approaching the physical default, when raw resources become totally unrecoverable, when the degraded soil literally creates zero yield regardless of the fertilizer applied. All current financial assets based on the extraction of those resources become ash. They mathematically go to zero. The smart capital, the massive predatory whales of the global investment world, they are starting to smell the smoke. They realize that their massive portfolios are full of physical debt masquerading as wealth. They will aggressively switch to Earth restoration assets, or ERAs, not to be benevolent, not to save the ecosystems, but to avoid their personal wealth evaporating into zero.
I really don't see it happening in the accelerated time frame you're suggesting. I mean, look at the markets today. Look at the S&P 500. Look at the tech sector valuations. Wealth is being generated at absolute record rates. The system is visibly working for the people who own capital. Why on earth would they voluntarily abandon a game that they are clearly winning? You're essentially telling the winner of a high-stakes poker game to flip the table over because the casino might catch fire next month. They're looking at their chips, and the chips are real. The party is very much still going.
That is precisely the metaphor. It is the champagne party. Inside the venue, the music is loud, the champagne is flowing, and the financial charts are glowing green. This is the fictitious financial growth.
But there is a window in this venue.
And you're the only one enlightened enough to look out of it?
Anyone with a basic understanding of thermodynamics can look out of it outside that window. The physical reality is brutally visible. The phosphorus is scattering into the dead zones. The topsoil is vanishing into the ocean at a rate of 24 billion tons a year. The massive underground aquifers in California and India are physically collapsing, causing permanent land subsidence. The wealth inside the room is a synchronized hallucination backed by a physical reality that is actively disintegrating. Those who do not look out the window are sinking hammers. They are dead weight. But the smart capital, the apex predators, they are already putting down the glass. They are quietly leaving the venue.
Leaving to go where? There is no other venue. We live on one planet. We have one highly integrated global economy. You can't just take your money and exit the physical market.
They are moving their capital into the infrastructure of metabolism. This is the exact definition of an Earth restoration asset. The global shift is from owning debt, which is the temporary right to consume, to owning the physical machinery of circulation. Think about the mechanics. When the municipal water runs out, the man who owns the paper rights to the dry reservoir is bankrupt. The man who owns the advanced filtration, the desalination plants, and the closed-loop urban recapture system is the king. That infrastructure is the only material backing left on Earth. The protocol switch is the cold realization that the absolute only safe haven for wealth is the system that maintains the physical conditions for biological life. Everything else is just paper waiting to burn.
But this transition you're describing, it sounds incredibly violent. It sounds unbelievably volatile. If trillions in capital suddenly flees traditional industries, legacy energy, global manufacturing, conventional agriculture, to chase these restoration assets, you will trigger an absolute collapse of the current system long before the new one is built. People need jobs today. They need affordable food today. You can't just flip a massive switch and expect society to hold together. We desperately need a soft landing. We need time to adapt our supply chains and our workforces to this new reality. You're talking about intentionally crashing the plane just to try and build a new one in midair.
There is no such thing as social time. There is only the physical deadline. You are pleading for a political timeline that physics simply does not offer. Once entropy maximizes, once those critical resources are fully diluted into the environment, no amount of printed money, no amount of political willpower, no amount of soft landing rhetoric can ever reverse it. You cannot print topsoil at the Federal Reserve. You cannot negotiate a peace treaty with the laws of thermodynamics.
So we just panic? Is that your grand strategy? Induce a global financial panic?
We undergo hyper-compression. The construction period for this new system, the massive circular infrastructure required to survive, will be forcibly compressed from decades into mere years by the sheer unadulterated panic of asset defense. When the realization finally hits the broader market that the linear model is mathematically dead, the migration will be a violent stampede. It will not be a polite global agreement where delegates hold hands and sign a treaty. It will look like cellular migration. It will start in isolated survival cells, wealthy regions, massive corporations, or heavily militarized city-states that ruthlessly secure their own closed circulation loops for water, energy, and rare earths. They will cleanly detach from the dying linear economy to save themselves.
That sounds entirely dystopian. You're describing a fractured world of heavily guarded lifeboats where the ultra-rich isolate themselves in these high-tech survival cells while everyone else is left to literally drown in the entropy and pollution of the old system. That isn't a solution to the climate crisis, that's a nightmare scenario. If the protocol switch creates a permanently bifurcated world, the restored elite and the ruined masses, then it has fundamentally failed the moral test of civilization. We need a solution that brings everyone along, not just the massive capital holders who can afford to buy their way into the new loop.
The moral test is irrelevant if the biological test has failed. The linear model is a sinking ship. You are actively arguing that we should keep the passengers on board the sinking vessel simply because the lifeboats do not have enough seats and are not comfortable enough for everyone. The choice approaching us is not political, it is not moral. It is a strict, binary test of intelligence.
It's a test of our basic humanity. If we lose that, if we leave billions behind to suffer, we lose the entire point of surviving in the first place. I refuse to accept that this brutal, capital-driven lifeboat scenario is our only option. We can fix the system together, democratically.
The protocol switch will activate regardless of your refusal. It is thermodynamically inevitable. The drowning rescue squad will continue to scream about fairness and democracy while the water rises over their heads. But the capitalists, the pure engine of greed, they will abandon the champagne party. They will permanently stop chasing linear profits to aggressively seize restoration materials. They will hoard the physical infrastructure of ecological repair. You either become a functional part of the restoration loop or you remain part of the waste. The definition of GDP is now rewritten. This is no longer economics. This is survival engineering. The party is over. Migration is the only rational investment.